On a quiet September evening in 1971, the small town of Cedar Rapids, Iowa, known for its tranquility, was shaken to its core by a discovery that would haunt its residents for decades. Deep in the woods, among the shadows of overgrown trees, two teenagers stumbled upon a chilling sight: the lifeless body of a young woman lying on the hood of an abandoned car. What began as a hunt for squirrels quickly transformed into a nightmarish encounter with tragedy. Who could have committed such a heinous act? And what dark secrets led to this horrific scene in a place so seemingly serene? The answers to these questions lay buried in a web of mystery, deceit, and violence. The victim, 17-year-old Maureen Farley, was a newlywed with dreams of a bright future. If you're fascinated by unraveling the darkest mysteries and exploring gripping true crime stories, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and become part of our investigative community. Let's get to the case. But her life was cruelly taken, leaving her half-naked and lifeless on the rusted remains of a car hidden in the woods. Her body bore unmistakable signs of violence, a tragic testament to the brutality of her final moments. The police investigation began with three potential suspects. One was an overly helpful man with an unsettling friendliness. Another was an old acquaintance of Maureen's, who mysteriously ended up in a psychiatric hospital shortly after her body was found. The third was her husband's former cellmate, a man disturbingly found with a photograph of her in his wallet. Each of these suspects seemed capable of harboring the dark intentions that led to her untimely death, but the truth remained elusive. Her body, discovered at 6:40 p.m. by the teens, was described in horrifying detail. Her bare feet, pristine and unmarked, suggested she had not walked to the site herself. She had been brought there. Her sweater clung to her lifeless frame, but her shirt was pulled high, and her jeans were dragged down below her hips. Investigators immediately recognized the possibility of sexual violence. The state of her clothing, coupled with the condition of her body, pointed to a crime of devastating cruelty. The abandoned car, covered in weeds that reached its roof, told its own story. It had been left there long before Maureen's body was placed upon it. Yet, despite its desolation, it became the grim stage for a crime that would haunt the town for decades. It would take 50 hard years for detectives to cobble together enough evidence to bring justice for Maureen Farley, but ultimately, a single hint would reveal the truth. The coroner's report confirmed the victim had suffered a traumatic blow to the head, resulting in cerebral hemorrhage. The force rendered her unconscious, and the lack of immediate medical assistance led to her death. The evidence suggested the perpetrator had hoped she might recover, but when it became clear that she wouldn't, the killer disposed of her body with calculated precision. Maureen's lifeless form was left on the hood of a car, deep within the woods, hidden far from prying eyes. Gravina Road, where her body was discovered, was an isolated stretch of forest path a kilometer from the city dump. Cars rarely passed through, and the overgrown vegetation around the vehicle emphasized how carefully the location had been chosen. The killer likely relied on the remoteness of the area to delay the discovery of her remains. The weeds surrounding the abandoned car painted an eerie image of desolation, while the condition of Maureen's body hinted at the cruelty of her final moments. The investigation gained momentum when her identity was confirmed. The tattoo on her arm and the report filed by her manager provided crucial details. Just a week before her disappearance, the manager of Aid's Cafe and Diner had reported her missing after she failed to show up for her third shift. Maureen was known for her punctuality and reliability, and her absence was deeply unusual. Concerned, the manager checked her dorm room, where everything appeared untouched, except for her work uniform, which was conspicuously missing. Maureen had recently moved to Cedar Rapids to be closer to her husband, David, who was serving a prison sentence nearby. Theirs was a relationship marked by turbulence. Their marriage was quick, and David's incarceration followed soon after. Despite the challenges, she remained steadfast, renting a small room in the dormitory and working tirelessly to support herself. Her weekly visits to the prison were part of a rigid routine, one she had followed without fail until the week she vanished. Was her absence part of the killer's plan, or had it been a result of her own decision? The discrepancy between her usual habits and the events leading up to her death hinted at a deliberate effort to isolate her. The investigation turned its focus to the people who might have been aware of her routines, particularly those who knew she would be alone that fateful weekend. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of her body confirmed that Maureen had been subjected to sexual violence before her death. The cruelty of the act left no doubt about the killer's depravity. The isolation of the crime scene, the lack of physical traces such as tire tracks or footprints, and the careful placement of her body suggested a perpetrator who was meticulous and calculated, leaving as little evidence as possible. The dormitory manager's account introduced unsettling details: a calm voice, a low male tone, and the distinct scent of sweetened tobacco smoke emanating from Maureen's room. This timeline marked the last known interaction before she vanished. The faint clues, an unknown visitor, and a scent tied to someone unfamiliar, hinted at a carefully orchestrated plan. Despite these details, her routine left a glaring absence. She had planned to visit her husband at the prison and attend church, but neither happened. Investigators speculated whether the person in her room had lured her away or coerced her into leaving. The calm demeanor described by the manager suggested she might have trusted this visitor, which made her disappearance even more chilling. Officers conducted another search of Maureen's room. It remained untouched, except for the notable absence of her work uniform. Interviews with neighbors failed to yield any witnesses who had seen her or the visitor after the manager's testimony. The lack of evidence in a shared dormitory was baffling and suggested the visitor had taken careful steps to avoid detection. Every day that went by, the tragedy got worse for her family. Her mother, Mary, clung to hope until officers confirmed the worst. As the eldest of 7 siblings, Maureen had been the pillar of the Brubaker family, always protective of her younger sister, Lisa. Born on July 4th, her bright and fiery personality had left an indelible mark on those who knew her. That light had now been extinguished, and her family struggled to understand who could harbor such malice. Investigators faced mounting frustration. The crime scene provided few clues, no tire tracks, no fingerprints, and no eyewitnesses. The sweet-smelling tobacco stood out as the only lingering trace of the person who had been in Maureen's room. It suggested someone who smoked an uncommon brand or used specific additives, potentially narrowing the suspect pool. There weren't any enemies in Maureen's life, which made things even more difficult. Co-workers, friends, and even her husband, David, described her as kind and dependable. No one suspected she was in danger, but her murder revealed a hidden side to her story, one rooted in calculated betrayal or malice. Whoever had taken her life had gone to great lengths to erase their presence and leave behind as little evidence as possible. When Bobby Moore showed up, it was a turning point in the case. Moore was someone from Maureen's past, and his appearance in Cedar Rapids was too strange to ignore. Moore's history of violence, particularly against women, placed him firmly under suspicion. David Farley's warnings to his wife about Moore now echoed ominously. "Be careful, he beats women." Moore's resurfacing in Cedar Rapids shortly after Maureen's disappearance raised further red flags. His claim that he was there to aid in her search was seen as suspicious rather than altruistic. The day her body was found, Moore voluntarily checked himself into a psychiatric hospital in Sioux City. This act, seemingly unprompted, struck investigators as peculiar. Was it a sign of a guilty conscience, or merely an unfortunate coincidence? The timing was damning, yet Moore's demeanor during questioning complicated the case. When confronted with the news of Maureen's murder, he firmly denied any involvement, insisting he had always regarded her as a sister. His alibi placed him in Sioux City at the time of her death, and to the astonishment of investigators, he passed a lie detector test with ease. Moore's involvement in the case left a long shadow, but when Maureen's ties were looked into more, another name came to the fore: Gary Castle, her husband's former cellmate. The police found out that Gary had just gotten out of jail a few days before Maureen went missing. During her frequent visits to David, Gary had interacted with her on multiple occasions, and evidence surfaced suggesting his interest in her went beyond casual acquaintance. Among his personal belongings, investigators found Maureen's photograph tucked into his wallet, a discovery that unsettled even the most seasoned detectives. The police turned their focus to Castle, determined to uncover a link between him and Maureen's disappearance. The possibility of him stalking her after his release was explored with fervor. Castle, however, denied any involvement during interrogation, maintaining he wasn't near Cedar Rapids on September 18th. When pressed, he provided a credible alibi that corroborated his claims, frustrating investigators yet again. Despite their efforts to trace his movements and tie him to the crime, Castle's connection to her murder remained elusive. The mounting dead ends left investigators desperate for clarity. Revisiting Maureen's dorm room, they hoped to find traces of Castle's presence that could link him to the mysterious visitor the dormitory manager overheard. But the search proved fruitless. The absence of evidence did not absolve Castle of suspicion, but it left investigators grappling with a case that refused to yield answers. Moore and Castle both stayed as mysterious and suspicious figures. Their ties to Maureen's sad death were both frustratingly close and far away. Despite the discovery of Maureen's photo in Gary Castle's wallet, investigators were forced to shelve the lead due to lack of supporting evidence. Frustrated but determined, they returned to the diner where she worked, hoping a second round of questioning might uncover new details. It was during these interviews that George, a regular customer, offered a surprising account. He claimed to have seen Maureen with a man who fit the description of a hippie on the night of her disappearance. Investigators were initially intrigued, but her husband, David, immediately cast doubt on George's motives. David revealed that George had previously approached Maureen with promises to help secure his release from prison. While George's gestures appeared friendly on the surface, they raised uncomfortable questions. Why was a 52-year-old man so interested in a 17-year-old waitress? George admitted he had offered her emotional support and car repairs, insisting his intentions were honorable. However, the detectives doubted his sincerity and began pressing him for answers. When questioned about his whereabouts on the night Maureen vanished, he claimed to have been at work at the Cedar Rapids bus depot. Investigators verified his alibi, confirming he worked from 1 p.m. to 9 p.m. on September 17th. Although this seemed to exonerate him, his interactions with her left lingering doubts. The detectives moved on, realizing they were back to square one. By 1972, the case had gone cold. Maureen's family was left devastated, particularly her mother, Mary. She struggled to care for her 6 remaining children while grappling with the unanswered questions surrounding her daughter's murder. The loss also left a lasting impact on Lisa, Maureen's youngest sister. Driven by grief and anger, Lisa later pursued a career in law enforcement, determined to keep her sister's case alive in Cedar Rapids. In 2006, the case saw a glimmer of hope when a new investigator re-examined the evidence. He discovered unprocessed DNA samples taken from Maureen's body, which were sent for advanced analysis. The lab successfully created a DNA profile of the suspected killer. While the breakthrough reignited hope, the profile failed to match any records in the national database, leaving the investigation at another impasse. 9 years later, in 2015, investigator Matt Denlinger revisited the case. Sifting through old files, he compiled a list of 75 individuals connected to the initial investigation. His plan was painstakingly simple but effective. Collect DNA from each suspect, compare it to the existing profile, and eliminate them one by one. The process, though slow, provided a structured path forward for a case that had been dormant for far too long. The investigation inched closer to a resolution when retired Lieutenant Ken Oshburn and former intelligence agent J.D. Smith joined forces with investigator Matt Denlinger. Together, they tackled the suspects from the 1970s, beginning with Bobby Moore and Gary Castle. Both men, however, were quickly ruled out when their DNA failed to match the profile developed from the forensic evidence. Yet another dead end loomed, until a groundbreaking method, forensic genealogy, entered the picture. Inspired by its success in identifying the Golden State Killer, the team decided to apply the same technique. They hoped it would finally unlock the secrets behind Maureen's death. However, when the damaged DNA sample collected decades earlier proved too degraded for immediate analysis, their hopes were dashed once more. Despite this setback, Denlinger's team persisted, re-examining every detail with relentless determination. Their efforts led them back to George Smith, the regular diner customer who had claimed to see Maureen with a hippie the night she disappeared. Initially dismissed due to his alibi, Smith's name resurfaced when investigators discovered he had never been subjected to DNA testing. When they looked into his past, they found disturbing information. Smith worked as a garbage collector and lived just a few blocks away from Maureen's room in 1971. His job would have familiarized him with the remote road where her body was found. The most chilling revelation, however, came from his obituary, written after his death in 2013. Friends and family fondly remembered him for the sweet-smelling tobacco he always smoked, a detail that immediately brought investigators back to the dormitory manager's testimony from 50 years prior. With Smith deceased and cremated, obtaining his DNA presented a new challenge. Denlinger pursued a different angle, locating one of Smith's children to request a sample. The process took a long time, but when the findings came back on September 24, 2021, exactly 50 years after Maureen's body was found, there was no doubt about them. George Smith's DNA matched the profile, confirming he was the man responsible for Maureen's brutal death. Denlinger contacted her sister Lisa to deliver the long-awaited news. Her reaction was very intense. She felt both cheerful and frustrated. When Denlinger shared the revelation with their mother, who was by Lisa's side, the weight of 5 decades lifted from their family, albeit with the bitter reminder that justice had come too late to confront the killer himself. The investigators pieced together Smith's likely actions on the day of the crime. They believed he lured Maureen to his home, preying on her vulnerability with an offer of assistance, perhaps with legal help or her car. Once she arrived, Smith's intentions became clear. When she rejected him, the situation escalated rapidly. A blow to her head ended her life, and the investigators suspected he sexually assaulted her either before or after the fatal injury. The details painted a chilling portrait of manipulation and violence. Smith likely kept Maureen's body hidden at his home until nightfall. Under the cover of darkness, he placed her body in his car and drove to the remote forest outside Cedar Rapids. The abandoned car in the woods became the stage for his grim attempt to erase the evidence. They theorized that he carried her body to the vehicle's trunk before fleeing the scene, ensuring the secluded area would delay the discovery. For Maureen's surviving family members, the answers reopened wounds that had never truly healed. Her mother and siblings, though grateful for the resolution, were haunted by the knowledge that Smith had lived a full life, respected in the community, and free from the consequences of his actions. The realization that he had walked among them, a seemingly ordinary man with a horrifying secret, was a bitter truth to accept. Worse still, her father and 2 brothers, who had passed away, never had the chance to know the killer's identity. The investigation into George Smith's life revealed the chilling contrast between his public persona and the darkness he had concealed. Known for his charm and dependability, he manipulated those around him with ease. The decades-long pursuit of justice for Maureen revealed not only the persistence of her family, but also the unrelenting determination of investigators who refused to let the case fade into obscurity.